All right, well, that's a good way to get your attention. So welcome this evening to session number 3 of the Mayor's Commission. We have a lot of material to go through tonight, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions and comments and ideas and suggestions. So we're going to jump into it pretty quickly. Just a reminder for those of you who are joining us online, I know it's been difficult the first couple of weeks for you to be able to get into the conversation, and I apologize for that. If you don't see a way to get into the conversation, I should be looking at you, you're over there. If you don't have a way to get into the conversation, you can use the raise my hand button or use the chat and just let our folks know that you have a comment and we will get you in there. They'll tell me and we'll break in to get you in. So we want you to be, feel fully engaged in this process. So this evening we're going to be talking about human resources, personnel, this recruiting, job posting, hiring, promotions, discipline, all those personnel things that fortunately I don't have to know a lot about because we have an outstanding HR staff. In fact, we have 30 years of HR directors right here in this row, so we've got a lot of understanding and experience. We're going to have 3 people sharing the presentation. We'll have on the big screen to be the presentation. We will post it onto the website tomorrow, so you're welcome if you don't have to try and copy everything down. You'll get a copy off the web after that. So our presenters, you've met Melinda Galler, who is Assistant City Manager and former HR Director. We have our HR Director, Matt Grebley-Unis, who will tag in, and then our training coordinator? Training specialist, Tamara Miller. It used to be Brooks. I'm in denial that she got married, so it's Tamara Miller back here. So we'll get all 3 of them up there, and with that, unless there's any questions from the group, I'm going to go ahead and get the presentation kicked off. So questions? Melinda.
So I want to start off with and just talk a little bit more about our team. So Matt has been with us for about 5 years. He had a career at Cigna in benefits before he came to HR at the city of Louisville. And then Tamara, she actually started in an admin support role in our community development department when she was just a baby. I think she was only 22. She continued to go to school while she worked for us, and she got her master's degree in training. And was it 2 years ago now? 4 years ago. When we added our training position. 3 years. So about 3 years ago, we added a training position in HR. And so there was no need to go outside and recruit because we had someone in-house who had a master's degree that was her field of expertise, and she knew our employees, so it was a great match. So I want to get started a little bit and kind of go over my part. I want to talk about the demographics of our employee work group, and we'll talk a little bit about look at some of our departments and some of our comparisons over the years. So who's running the... All right, we go to the next slide and then the next slide. All right, so currently this is our overview. We're 74% white. We're 13.8% Hispanic or Latino, 7.4% African American, 2.5% Asian, 1.3% 2 or more races, and just under 1% American Indian and Native Hawaiian. So the next slide, I think, gives us a better perspective of what our comparison data to the city of Louisville. So if you look at our citizens, and this is from the census website for 2019, the city of Louisville population is right at 43% white, 32% Hispanic or Latino, 12.6% black, right at 9.8% Asian, and all other at 5%. So we look at our current employee population compared to the city of Louisville to see where we are over or underutilized. And obviously we are very overutilized in white, almost 32%. Our area where we're most underutilized is Hispanic. So we're 18% below the community makeup. Black, we are 5% below. Asian, we're 7.3% below. All other, 3% below. Then you'll notice on the end, we just showed you the Denton County demographics off the same census website. So the next slide is a comparison over the last 20 years. We were able to pull this data because we create an equal employment opportunity plan that we create to respond to grants. So if you look at 2000, we were 89% white and only 6% black and only 4% Hispanic. Then when we look at 2010, that 89% white had dropped to 82%. Very little change in black, only a 1% increase, a 5% increase in Hispanic. Then you jump to 2020, we're 74.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Yolanda. We're not seeing those slides progress. We're still on the very first slide.
So while he's working on that technical difficulty, so from 2020, we've gone from 82, in 10 years, from 82% white to 74% white. Again, no change really in our black, it's still 7%. Hispanic has increased to 14%, and then Asian, only a 1% increase. So that's our demographic comparison if you look at the last 20 years. And when I look at that, we don't see very much change. And one of the reasons for that is because we have a very low turnover rate for the city of Louisville employees. That's a good thing because we have a good culture. It's not a good thing when we're trying to increase our diversity. So if you look at from 2000 to 2019, you'll see that our turnover rate has never been above 9%, even dropping as low as 4%.
Wait. Yolanda, can you see the new slide now, the turnover rate slide? Or any of our online, can you now see the turnover rate slide?
It looks like we're on slide 5 of 36.
Yes.
Slide 6 of 36. Does it have a purple years, 2000, 2005, 2010? Is that what y'all are seeing? One slide. So again, we have a very low turnover rate. We are starting to finally see a large number of retirements. I think we really grew our employee population in the 90s, and so you are eligible to retire when you have 20 years in the city. Some people work 25, some people work 30, but we're really starting to see some turnover, especially in police and fire, by retirements. So hopefully we'll have some opportunity in the near future to start working on our diversity, and certainly we're going to appreciate any input that we get from this group that will help us increase that applicant pool. So if we move to the next slide, hopefully our online audience is on the department demographic overview. Is that the slide? Are we all on the same page now? Yes. Okay, good. So we wanted to talk about, we'll show you the demographics of our 4 largest departments. So we start with Public Services Department, just so you kind of have an idea. That is the department that runs the water plant, the wastewater plant. They do all of our street maintenance, they do utility line maintenance, they do our facility maintenance, and maintain all of our fleet. So in that department, as of July 2020, we're about 67% white, about 4% Asian, 9% black, and about 17% Hispanic. Then our next department, besides public safety, our next largest department is the Parks and Recreation Department. In that department, we're about 70% white, right at 1% Asian, right under 6% black, and about 20% Hispanic, and then 3% 2 or more races. Then the next slide, we look at our employee demographics for public safety. This is the entire department, so it's not focused just on firefighter and police officers. So in our fire department, you'll see that we're 90% white, only 1.9% American Indian, 1.3% Asian, and 6.9% black. And while this is very disturbing, 5 years ago, we were 100, well, we might have had 1 or 2 Hispanic, but the majority were all white males. One of the challenges that we've had in recruitment for fire is for the last 20 years, when we post those jobs and accept applications, we only accept applications from applicants who are already certified firefighter, EMT, paramedics. And just historically, the people that have historically firefighters have been mostly white males. So this year, we had quite a few retirements, and so our plan pre-COVID, we had enough vacancies that we were going to do a general recruitment, which would obviously provide us an opportunity for more diversity. We were going to hire and run our own fire academy and then train them as EMT paramedics. But unfortunately, when COVID hit, and we have seen a number of our firefighters have to be quarantined or have been positive for COVID and quarantined, that we had to fill those positions quicker. We were afraid that we didn't have time to go 15 positions that couldn't actually work as firefighters for up to 6 to 9 months before we would get them trained. So we just recently again opened up another certified hiring process. Hopefully the next time we'll be able, when COVID is over, to be able to run that process. There are challenges with that because you have to bring a group together to do a written test. It requires a lot of togetherness. Police department, on the other hand, they're a little more diverse. They're about 75% white, 4% or 0.4% American Indian or Alaskan, 1.2% Asian, 12% black, 10.7% Hispanic, and 0.08% 2 or more races. This slide just shows you police officers only. So the slide previously was a breakdown of all the department. And remember, the police department also has communications. So that is the dispatch communication center, and they dispatch all of the fire calls, EMS calls, and police calls. The police department also has all of the detention staff. We have a holding facility jail, so we don't house prisoners for longer than a couple of days as they're transitioned from our Louisville jail to the Denton County jail. And then obviously we have some civilians that do clerical and records management in those positions. So when you look at our police officer, the police officer position by race alone, you'll see we're 77% white, 1% 2 or more race, 1% Hawaiian Pacific Islander, 1% Asian, 1% American Indian Alaskan, 8% black, and 11% Hispanic. So we had our HR staff contacted some of our neighboring cities as we were preparing for this because we wanted to see how our police department compares with our neighboring cities. We just put this graph together to show you where we fall. So Fort Worth has only 65% white, 21% Hispanic, and 10% black. Compared to on the other side of the spectrum, you have Coppell at 85% white, 8% Hispanic, 5% black, and 2% Asian. And we fall somewhere in the middle with the 77%, and then the breakdown as we looked at on the previous slides. Chief Deaver put this slide together, and I know why he chose this date. You're probably wondering why we looked at this since August of 2018. And I know he chose that date because that is when he was promoted to police chief. So this has been one of his goals, is to increase the diversity in his department. So since he has been chief, we've hired 71% white, 1.5% Asian, 13% black, 10 or 11% Hispanic and 3% two or more races. So we are constantly, you'll notice that we've increased our recruitment efforts. HR had a new position added in the budget 2 years ago, who worked with the police department. They're doing more outreach at college and universities, at military bases. They've changed some of the processes for how we test and how we move people through the process. And so that's obviously helping us. Now this is the demographics by our position level. So if you look at our supervisor level, we're 81% white, and we're only 7% Hispanic, about 8% black, and then all of the rest are right at 1%. But and then you look at our non-supervisor, we're 71% white, 16.5% Hispanic, 7.6% black, 2.7% Asian. Then as we move up and you look at our manager level, we're only 7.4% Asian, 3.7% Hispanic, and we have no black managers. And then you get to director, we're 4.8% black, 4.8% Hispanic, and 90% white. So we obviously need to find ways to recruit for positions that are at our manager and director level that are more representative of our community. So with that's kind of an overview of just gives you the data as it is today. Then Matt's going to talk a little bit more about our processes and recruitment, hiring, and retention, and focus a little more on a deep dive into what we're doing.
Okay. All right. So my name is Matt Gribliunas. I'm the HR director here at the City of Louisville. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about recruitment, what our hiring process is, and then I'll finish up with the employee relations piece. I'll move to the next slide. So obviously HR, one of our main functions is the recruitment and the hiring. And Melinda just touched on this. One of the positions we have in HR is newer to us. It's the recruitment and onboarding specialist. So we got that position back in 2018, and that really helped us because prior to that, we were very reactive in our recruitment. Having this position has helped us be more proactive, advertise more, and get out in the community. It's also nice because our departments, that's a good resource for them to where they can get additional training and they can be helped with their whole process of hiring the right person. And so I'll be referring to this recruiting specialist throughout here to let you know kind of what their touch points are. So the first thing that we'll do when we're looking to start the recruiting process, whether it's a new position or filling an existing position, we're going to take a look at the job description. Now that's where our recruiting specialist comes in and they work with the department's hiring manager and they'll look at the job description and say, okay, do we need to make any edits to this? If we haven't hired that position for a while, it could be outdated. So we're looking at the essential functions of the job, knowledge, skills, and ability. You're looking at what education, what amount of experience is required for that job. So once that job is updated, the other job description is updated, the other important part is what are we going to pay that position? And so we can't just look at a position and say, well, especially if it's new, let's just pay this job, it should get paid about $45,000. What we have is a pay plan. So each of our jobs are listed in classifications in that pay plan, and with the exception of managers and above, they all have salary ranges. And so when we're creating that new position, we do a point factor analysis, and what we're looking at is different aspects of that job to determine where that needs to land on the pay range so that way we're consistent with our pay plan and when we're hiring. And so we're looking at things in that point factor analysis, like what's the education required for a job, what type of experience, do they manage people, is it a job that requires a lot of independent work, and it rates the job out and helps us place it in the right spot on that pay plan. Now, the other important thing is at the city, when we hire somebody in, typically they start at the minimum of that range, whatever their classification is. Now, if they come to us with a greater experience, they're exceeding our requirements, I have the flexibility to offer up to an additional 5% above that minimum, and then anything above 5% would have to go to our city manager for approval. But we also want to look inside at our current workforce and look at what they're making, what their experience is, how long they've been here, because we don't want to create any internal inequities by bringing in people all over the place. So it's all about this pay plan helps us stay consistent and be fair with these pay practices. Another thing that's important to remember is, and in your handout, I didn't even mention this, the handout that we gave you has several directives that I'm going to refer to tonight, and this is one of them. So our base pay and any pay adjustments, it's a directive that the city manager approves, and so we can't go outside of that. We have to follow those guidelines and procedures. Next slide, please. So at that point, when we're ready to post for the job, all of our jobs are posted on our website. We use, it's an applicant tracking system called NeoGov. So that tracks all the applications from when it's first submitted all the way through to a point where the person gets rejected or the person is ultimately hired. We also have, and this is where recruiting specialist comes into play, is we do advertising on job boards. So think of like if we're going out for an engineer, there's societies, there's associations that they have their own websites, and a lot of times when you go out to those, you see that they have advertising notifications for jobs that are posted. And so we'll try to advertise out there. Also, what's big now, LinkedIn, Facebook, for where we can advertise. And so our recruiting person helps keep all of our advertising up to date and reaching out to as many people as possible through those networks. So the jobs are posted typically for about 2 weeks, sometimes longer than 2 weeks if needed. Once that position closed, then we'll start the screening process in HR to where all we're looking at is, does this applicant meet the minimum qualifications? If the applicant meets the minimum qualifications, then we'll push them over to the hiring manager in that department. And it's up to that hiring manager to decide to screen through. They're going to look at the MQs. They're going to look at any of the, whatever the experience, education, all that's required. But we have preferred experience or certifications that might be not required but nice to haves. But then, so they'll screen depend on who to bring in for an interview, and then ultimately tell us who their final candidate is. Now, we provide these supervisors with training, so Tamara and the HR department works on helping the supervisors know how to screen, what questions to ask in an interview, what questions not to ask in an interview. But then that's where the recruiting specialist also helps. And so if they say, hey, I need some good questions to ask these candidates for this particular job, we can help with that. If they want to put together an interview panel, then we can have our HR person sit on the panel and help with that process as well. Next slide, thanks. So once we have the final candidate, we will, then HR takes over to do a background check. We'll look at criminal history. We'll look everywhere from the county to nationwide. We'll also take a look at if the job requires somebody to drive. We check their driver's license, look at their driving history, make sure there's no issues there. If they handle money, we will do a credit check. And then if a certain level of education, say a bachelor's degree is required, we can do a check to make sure, did they actually go to university? Did they graduate? What was their GPA? What was their area of study? So we can get that information. Now, if the person worked for another city, it's always a good idea because we can do an open records request. And so we'll reach out to that city and we'll get a copy of all their evaluations along with any discipline that they might have, because that's a really good tool to get an idea of what their work habits are, any issues that they might have, or how grave an employee they are. And then the last thing, they'd obviously have to pass one of our drug screenings before finally getting that offer. Next slide. So this is a nice slide. What we did is I pulled the report and I looked at all the jobs that we filled since January 1st, 2020. Now, because of COVID, we had a hiring freeze in March, and we just now are starting to post jobs. And so this is only a reflection of 16 jobs. We would normally have more than that, but just so you have an idea of the data you're looking at. But it's each step of our process. So the top left corner, that's the percentage based on race and ethnicity of applications that we got in. And then to the right, that's where we did the screening, and we sent that pool of employees for that met minimum qualifications. The bottom left, that's the diversity of those that were interviewed, and then ultimately who was hired. Next slide. So when we're recruiting for leadership roles, such as the directors, it's a little bit different, and we've actually gone to the outside for a couple of our directors recently. And so our finance director, David Erb, he came from Mount Prospect, Illinois. We actually used an outside agency to help us with that recruitment process. Along with when we had to look for a new police chief, we went to the outside and had an agency help us with that as well. And ultimately, Assistant Chief Deaver was promoted to chief. Now, we do have an internal process as well when we look for directors. If we don't use an agency, we had our Parks and Rec director is fairly new. She came from Corpus Christi. We've got our Public Services director who is from Capel, and then our library director came from Keller. Our fire chief, y'all probably know, so Chief Tittle, he passed away this year. He fought cancer for about 5 years. During that time, our assistant chief then, Assistant Chief Mark McNeil, he had to fill in for Chief Tittle while he was out a lot of that time. So he gained a lot of experience in there. Well, when Chief Tittle passed away and we knew we needed to get a new fire chief, city manager's office, they went and they spoke to all of our firefighters and they said, what are you looking for in a fire chief? And based on their feedback of what they were looking for in a chief and the performance that Assistant Chief McNeil has shown at that time, then the decision was made to go ahead and promote him to chief. And so that's extremely thankful to have him at this point. Now, sworn police, sworn fire, everything I was talking about before I didn't specify, that was our hiring process as far as general government goes. It's a little bit different when you're looking at police and fire. They still had to go online and submit an application, but when they're going through that application, there's a lot more questions they're having to ask than our general government. And so they're having to answer yes or no to, have you ever been convicted of a DWI? Have you ever been convicted of family violence? Have you ever pled guilty or been convicted of a Class A misdemeanor? So NeoGov screens out a lot of our applicants just based on some of those questions. And I'll talk a little bit, I'll have Chief Deaver talk in just a minute about some of those background standards. But then the rest, so somebody gets through that screening process. At that point, for police and fire, they all take a written exam. Then if they pass a written exam, then they'll take a physical exam or a physical test. So the physical ability test for police is a rowing test right now. And then for fire department, it's what you would picture. So they're running up and down steps, carrying hose, dragging hose, hitting a Kaiser sled, dragging a dummy, things that they're going to simulate in real life. If they pass that, then they'll go through the polygraph, a psych exam, ultimately a physical exam. But again, it's that the background that when we have actually a background investigator for police and multiple in the police department and then one in the fire department, because obviously those are going to be much more stringent standards than for our general government. And that is where they move out of the process. And I'll have Chief Deaver talk in just a minute about that. So Melinda stole my thunder a little bit on these slides, but this is, for 2019, our firefighters that when we tested for them, this is the demographics of each of the steps of the process. And as Melinda stated, we don't have a very diverse pool to even begin with for the firefighters. But you can see the first pie chart is the diversity of who applied and then who tested and then ultimately who was hired. And the next slide, there you go. That's for the police officers for 2019. And so you can see the pool of applicants automatically is much more diverse. And so we do both certified and non-certified. And so when you don't have to be a police officer and we're going to put you through the academy, then our pool of applicants is automatically going to be greater. Now these numbers, what they show you is the last 3 years of who we've had applied for police officer all the way through the process, each step of the way, ultimately to the number of people that were hired. And so we have no shortage of applications for police officer. We've got over 2,000 applications in over the last 3 years that have applied. But you can see how those numbers dwindle down very quickly. So only less than 2% of the people that apply actually get hired on as a police officer. And again, that comes down to the background investigators as they're doing those screenings. I'll let Chief Deaver talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Matt. So yeah, it's very difficult for us to find good quality candidates. This is the background package that we complete. It's probably, I know one of them's 42 pages, and the other one's quite a bit more than that. Where they commonly wash out in our practice is in the background. So some of the things that would be rejections, failure to pay debt, Class A misdemeanor or higher, pattern of drug abuse as an adult, selling drugs as an adult. Some of these seem quite obvious, right? Can't have used marijuana within the past 3 years or any other illegal drug within the past 10 years. So we just changed that standard 3 years ago. I think it was 3 years ago. The standard before that was if they had ever tried like cocaine. If they had tried cocaine one time in their life when they were 16 years old, they could never be a Louisville Police Department or a Louisville police officer. They could be an FBI agent, Secret Service agent, but they couldn't work here. So that didn't seem right. So we changed that up to make it more reflect what is acceptable in society today. So that's one of the changes that we made that has really helped out a little bit. That any other Class B misdemeanor within the last 10 years would be a rejection, conviction of DWI as an adult, probation for any Class B within the last 10 years, or admission to any criminal activity. And the one thing that gets people more than anything else, and it's got so bad that I had to put a letter in the beginning of the employment packet that said, if you lie, you're going to be automatically terminated or automatically rejected. Because we have people that will lie about the silliest things because they don't want to admit to it because whatever reason. They lie about things that would not be a rejectable thing that if they just admitted to it. So that's the biggest issues that we have in finding good quality candidates. We've had people go through our process. We have discovered things, and they're currently working at other police departments. And we reject them for one of these reasons. I'll leave it at that.
One other thing that I want to add about the police and fire process is that it's all objective. So as HR screens the jobs on general government, they look and see, does somebody have a bachelor's degree? Or is somebody, did they have a Class A water license or whatever it is that's required? But on the police job, the NeoGov system is actually set up with questions that ask some of these things. Have you ever been convicted of a DWI? Or have you ever, did you smoke marijuana in the last 3 years? And so once you answer those questions, the system determines who gets notified they can test and who's rejected. So that is all done by this self-selection through NeoGov. Then the next step is the written exam if you're not certified. You either pass or you don't. If you don't pass, you're out of the system. Then the next step would be the road test or the physical ability for fire. You either pass or you don't. The background process, we've tried to make that objective. So if one of these things occurs, you're automatically out. So we want to be fair and consistent all the way down the line and help make sure that we don't have any bias in our selection process. And HR is very involved in the police and fire hiring process. They administer the written tests. There's a lot of oversight. On the civilian, the general government side that Matt was talking about, it's very decentralized. Once those job applications are sent to the department, that is where, when they're just selecting who they want to interview, when they're selecting who they hire, it's a lot more difficult to know if there's bias there. And so that we know that that's an area where we can have improvement, and that's going to be one of the things that we're going to be working on.
All right, so the next slide is talking about our lateral transfer program. So in 2016, this was implemented for the police department. So at that time, we had 20 police vacancies. And it wasn't a lack of testing. We were still testing. We just couldn't fill those vacancies. So the way the lateral transfer works is basically, so I'll start by saying police officers, they have a salary range, but it's built as steps. So they have 7 steps. Typically takes them about 5 years to get to the top step. So based on their years of experience at another city as a sworn police officer, they could come over here, get hired on, and we would take their years of service working as a police officer somewhere else and move them into the pay plan where they would be if they would have worked here. And so prior to that, if somebody says, so somebody worked at Arlington for 15 years and they say, you know, I really want to come work at City of Louisville. Well, before this, if they would have started at step 1. And so more than likely, that would have been a pay decrease. So a couple things happen. One, we help fill our vacancies. So right now, we've only got about 7 or 8, so it does help. But then the other part is you're getting a police officer who's already experienced, has done this before, and even better, we don't have to send him to the academy. And so now we've got a police officer that's going to get out on the street even sooner than if we had a new recruit with no experience.
So can I add one thing here that's important to know, that the police department in the background process, if they're looking at it, like Kevin said, there's officers that work in other cities that want to work here, but if they have discipline issues or if they had problems, then we don't hire them. You know, our standards are much higher than some of our neighboring cities. The same thing when a police officer leaves a city, the police chief is required to complete, it's called an F5, and you're either leaving under honorable conditions, general conditions, or dishonorable conditions. And so sometimes when people leave the departments, they're getting general or dishonorable. We won't hire them under any circumstances. But on our transparency page, if you have the opportunity to look, all the officers that have been terminated from our city for whatever reason, then they get a general, other cities will pick them up, and we don't do that.
So yeah, so on the promotion piece, for general government, it's pretty straightforward. First of all, we do prefer to, if we can hire or promote from within, absolutely, that's what we want to do. But you still have to apply. And so we'll put the job posting out on the website, general government positions. They'll apply if they're interested. So sometimes it'll just be an internal posting if we know we have a good candidate pool internally. Otherwise, we can go to the outside. If somebody internally gets promoted, it'll either get a minimum of a 5% increase, or they'll get a 5% increase, or they'll move to the minimum of that new classification. So whichever is greater, 5% or the new minimum. Now, police and fire, a little bit different. They actually submit a notice of intent that they want to promote and go through that process. So they submit that to HR, and they have 3 steps. So they have an exam, they have a assessment center, and then an interview. And HR is involved in each step of that process. And so the written exam is done by a professional test writing company, is where we get the test from, but HR administers the test. The assessment center, it's a real life mock event of an emergency, and they're having to respond to, as the different things are changing, they have to respond to how they would react, what they would do. And again, that's administered by HR. And then when we get to the interview process, that's a panel, and HR sits on that panel as well. All right, so talk a little bit about employee relations and discipline. I do have a copy of our discipline directive in your handout. So that directive we explained to supervisors. It's a guide to help you if you have to deal with any discipline issues. Now at the city, we do everything, it's progressive discipline. So you've got, on one end of the spectrum, you start with a counseling, and the other end, you've got a termination. But the whole idea, and how we train our supervisors, is the whole idea of discipline is to change the behavior. It's not supposed to be a punishment. And so if you're dealing with somebody who say they show up to work late a couple days, hopefully just that counseling should change that behavior and get them to work on time. If you have something a little more severe where you have somebody who's insubordination, you may decide to go straight to a written reprimand or maybe even a suspension. Now, what's considered formal discipline at the city is a written reprimand or above. And so written reprimands, suspensions, demotions, terminations, those all sit in human resources in that employee's personnel file. There are some situations where it's going to be an automatic termination for employees. A few of those I'll mention is one is job abandonment. So if you have an employee, they're no show to work for 3 working days in a row. They don't call in sick, they don't have a vacation day scheduled, they're missing in action. I don't know where they're at. 3 days in a row is automatic termination. Now, another one that's really important is the failure to report an accident, and that's following the drug and alcohol-free policy. And so any of our employees, if they're driving if they're driving a city vehicle, if you're driving your own vehicle for city purposes, or if you're driving a self-propelled vehicle like a riding lawnmower, if you have an accident, you cause damage to that vehicle, to somebody else's vehicle, to somebody's property, to our own property, you have to report that within 2 hours to your supervisor, and then you submit to a drug test. If you don't tell your supervisor you had that accident and caused damage within those 2 hours, it will be an automatic termination. And we explain it doesn't matter if you totaled the police car or if you just scratched the bumper because you backed into a light pole. You have to report everything. And that really leads to the dishonesty point is you can or you will be terminated at the city for dishonesty. And so we explain that you're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. You own up, you learn, and you move forward. But on dishonesty, I mean, it all comes down to that employee's integrity. And so it's always going to be an automatic termination if somebody's dishonest. So the last piece to talk about is that what are the different avenues that employees have if they have complaints or concerns. So the first one, and again, this is another directive you got in your handout, but it's a complaint and appeal process. And so anybody can have a complaint about maybe it's their working conditions, or maybe it's the interpretation of a policy or a procedure. Maybe they want to appeal their performance eval. Most of the appeals we get, though, are for discipline. And so at the bottom of your written reprimand, it says you've got 10 days to file an appeal with Human Resource Department. And so in your directive, you would see that there's certain steps that they have to follow for that appeal process. And the first one would be taking that to the department director. And so if they're appealing a written reprimand, they take it to the department director. If they uphold that decision, then it could go up to the city manager next, and our city manager has the final decision on whatever that appeal may be. So most times when we see appeals, it's either going to be on written reprimands, and then we see a lot of terminations end up going to an appeal. Then unlawful harassment. So any unlawful harassment, our supervisors know that if you hear of any sort of unlawful harassment, whether it's sexual harassment or some sort of discrimination, that automatically comes to the HR department. If an employee is dealing with it, they can come straight to the HR department, and we handle all investigations that have to do with unlawful harassment, and we'll do a full investigation. Now, sometimes they don't want to do a formal complaint. I'm still going to investigate to the best of my ability because our employees don't need to be coming to work and not feeling comfortable in their workspace. And the last thing is we've got an ethics hotline. So if an employee wants to be anonymous and submit a concern or a complaint, they can do that online. And then I'm notified as HR director, and then our city attorney is notified. The good news is since I've been here, I've only had 2 of those. Melinda, you probably haven't had many either.
Have a way to deal with complaints when they feel like they haven't been treated fairly. And the thing that we're most proud of, the 30 years of HR experience, is I would say the answer to that is yes. In the 30 years we've been here, we've only had 1 complaint that went to the EEOC, and that was over 25 years ago. And so when I talk to other HR directors, they'll typically have 4 or 5 on their desk at all times, and we don't have that. Our culture is such that we have ways that if employees feel like they're being mistreated or that something is unfair, or they have a resource and they feel like that we're able to resolve that.
All right, so at this time, I'm going to have Tamara come up for the training piece.
Are you asking questions? Do we have to wait for everything's up?
Yeah, we're going to take questions
We can stop and breathe, so I can write everything down.
We're going to get through all the presentation. We just have a few more slides with this piece so that we could get through it, and then we will absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just kidding. So a lot of what Melinda and Matt talked about was more so to the hiring process, the recruitment process, and all of that. So what I will talk about is our training and development program. So hooray, you're hired at the City of Louisville. So what's the next step? Next slide. So this is our new employee orientation. You get to spend a lovely 4 hours with me talking about everything City of Louisville. So what is it to be an employee at the City of Louisville, our culture, some policies and procedures, just great things that you need to know. And most of you, if you've worked for any type of company, you know the new hire process. So that's what our new employee orientation consists of. One of the things that I do want to point out is the culture of Louisville. So back in 2018, our city manager got a committee of people together from all departments in the city to come up with a new value statement. So our value statement that we had in place had been there probably, I want to say since the 90s. I was a baby. But so the... So that value statement didn't really accurately define who we were as an employee base. So we wanted something that was new and improved. And what we came up with as a committee, and you kind of see the picture of the committee there, was the Louisville Way. So the Louisville Way consists of we value people, we serve every day, and we build towards our future. So that's the culture of Louisville. That's how we hire. That's how employees are rewarded at the City of Louisville. So it's kind of in everything that we do. And it starts in that hiring process. Does this person have those qualities to continue the Louisville way as they're here as employees? Another part, I'm sorry, can you go back one? Another part of that, we actually, from that same committee, we came up with an award, kind of like an award system. It's called the Way Award. And so these are given out to employees throughout the year for various things, just going above and beyond and truly living the Louisville way. Another part of that was it's a team of people from, there's representatives from every department. So there's about 20 people on a team called the Way Team. And the Way Team has the opportunity to engage employees, to get them together. So employee events, things of that nature to keep us all engaged in the Louisville way. I think we're good. Thank you. So I want to talk about our training and development program. As Melinda mentioned, I'm the training specialist. So I have the opportunity to help our employees when they are hired at the City of Louisville. Biggest thing, 3 focus areas that we have in our training and development program is, one, we want to focus on the skills that you already come to the city with. How can we continue to improve those skills? The other part is more compliance-based, so making sure that we're educating all of the employees on what their rights and responsibilities are. And the third focus area is going to be to learn new skills. So what things that we can continue to sharpen the saw. Next slide. Big program that we have for the leadership in Louisville is called our Leadership and Development Series, nicknamed LDS. So this is a program where we have 9 leadership courses. I do want to say that I manage this program, but I don't teach all of the courses. So there are some courses that are online, some are done in person, and I create those, and then I also teach those classes. But we also use outside consultants, and I don't know if he's online tonight, but Calvin Dorsey from Dorsey Management Services, he actually just taught one of our classes, Effective Communication. So we are trying our best to solicit for people to teach these classes right here in our own community, pulling people from our own community. So you'll see that's the list of classes that we currently have. Some of those might actually look familiar to you. The next part, and just compliance training, is something that's very important to us because we always want to equip all of the employees with the skills that they need. So if you're ever in a situation How do I handle it? How do I know? What are the policies and procedures? So what we do is we offer, and you see the compliance courses here, these are just a few of them that we try to hit on a rotating basis. This past year, we actually did ethics in the workplace. That was a required training for all employees to go through. This coming up year, we are focusing on diversity and inclusion, which I'm hoping that this group can actually help us just kind of coming up with ideas and topics and things that we can talk about and focus on. And the last focus area of training is just all employee training. So various topics like I said, to continue to sharpen the saw, to continue to work on those skills that you already came to the city with. So some of them might be things like customer service, or how do I keep time as a supervisor? How do I approve payroll? Those types of things. And then we also just recently this past year, we had a lot of employees to reach out to say that, this is a hard time for us right now going through COVID-19. Part of our employees were working at home. So we did a stress management class through Cigna. So those types of things that we want to focus on and the well-being of the employees at the city of Louisville. So big part of education, not only for our employees, is that we partner with different programs that we have in Louisville. I want to specifically point out just a few of them, and I think Chief Deaver is going to talk about, I hope so, he kind of gave me a weird look, the Police Explorer Post and the Criminal Justice Practicum, and then also Teen Court. I think he has to use my mic. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we have our Explorer program. I have a little bit more information on it next week, but it's through the Boy Scouts of America. We've been doing it for many, many years, like most police departments have. You've got to be 14 years of age. You age out at age 21. And to be considered for that, you have to have a parental approval if you're younger than 18. And you have to maintain passing grades throughout. If you ever fail a subject, you're out of the Explorer program. So it's a unique opportunity that gives those kids a little bit of an insight into what we do and the many different careers that there are in the police department.
And the Criminal Justice Practicum.
So that's through the Career Center. And they come out every year. They send a handful of students that have an interest in some part of the legal system. They may want to be an attorney. They may want to be a prosecutor, something like that, or a police officer. And they come out and we give them instructions on different facets of being a police officer. They usually come out and they'll spend anywhere from 4 hours a day for about 3 weeks during that time frame.
Thank you. And then another one, if you look here on this slide, is the Library Teen Advisory Group. So this group actually assists in developing teen programs at the library. We also have Teen Court, which is an alternative volunteer program so that young offenders have the opportunity to make restitution for any offense. One that I want to focus on, the last two I definitely want to focus on. One is our Project Search program. We partner with LISD. We've been doing this since about 2015. We actually bring in interns from LISD who have special abilities. They come to us and they actually work in the city. So various jobs that they have. It is an unpaid internship. They have LISD staff that actually helps them with whether it be resume writing, how to apply for a job, those types of things to help them be prepared for the workforce. And then the other one I want to talk about is the City Council's Youth Action Council, which is coming up on their 4th year, I believe. So this is open to all Louisville youth students who are in from 10th grade to 12th grade to be able to participate in this program to help the council, to understand what challenges and things might be happening with the youth in Louisville. It's also a great program because they are truly, they are kind of the inspiration for other youth in the community of, being out there and truly trying to help in the projects that they do. The last thing I want to talk about is just our future initiatives. One of the things Matt pointed out was that we are bringing, we'll have the position, our onboard and recruitment specialist in HR, which is definitely going to help us as far as how we interact, diversifying our workplace. So going out to job fairs, interacting with students, going out to HBCUs. We actually have a partnership with a website, Handshake, that we have 4 HBCUs on the list so that we are posting seasonal and part-time jobs and those types of things, interacting with those colleges to help diversify our workplace. The other piece of it is that we have an opportunity through our hiring program, NeoGov, to hide the applicant names on the application, so that takes away the bias. I believe when I listened in on the meeting from last week, someone had mentioned something about bias being in the name of someone or someone. It might have been you. I'm sorry. You do have cool hair, by the way. So that's one of the things that we are going to try to move forward in when it comes to recruitment. The next part is actually training and development. So what we're trying to come up with is a plan of action moving forward. How do we make this important to our employees? The first part is we actually want to get together a commission, sort of like the one that you have here, to just a group of employees to talk about diversity and inclusion, what that means to them to work for the city, what it means to be a minority working for the city of Louisville. The next part is to do an internal pulse survey. So this is actually very helpful for me as a trainer because I never like to teach you something that you already know, right? So what are things that people have questions about? That's going to help us in the next part of that process of creating a formalized training program to be required for all employees to go through. The last part is to bring in someone from the outside, so someone who is well-versed in diversity and inclusion to talk to the employees at the city of Louisville. I think it's so important that we see it from someone else's perspective. I don't know about you, but for me, if you're the only, person of color in the room somewhere, it's kind of hard for people to really understand your point of view. So bringing in someone else will definitely help them develop that empathy and see a different point of view. So those are our future initiatives. I'm going to pass it back over to James and hope I don't get a lot of questions.
All right, we got plenty of time for questions that I think Tracy has some for sure. I forgot at the start of the session to introduce tonight's council member who's joining us, and that's Councilman Brandon Jones, right there in the middle, wearing Star Trek red. So apologize for forgetting earlier, but I caught up now, so hopefully I'm still working tomorrow. We'll see. At this point, we've got all 3 of our presenters here. We've taken the presentation off of the screen so that we can see our online group, but if we need to bring it back up at some point, we can. We do have printed copies in front of you, so I'm hoping we can do without that so we can see our online group. We'll run microphones around, so any questions you have on what you've seen, any thoughts about it, any comments, suggestions, ideas, criticisms, this is your time.
Dr. Petaway has questions.
Yes, I do have questions, and I wrote them down, but respectful of time, of course. Thank you for your presentations and sharing your expertise. I had a couple of questions, but I'll just be respectful of time. You mentioned a point factor analysis, and you stated that for some careers with the city, you do look within. If you're already overpopulated demographically with the cultures that are within the city, aren't you just recycling and not looking out into the community to bring in a diversified group of potential candidates and employees, because that's recycling, in my opinion. With all due respect, I just don't understand that concept.
So the point factor system really doesn't have anything to do with who we hire. That's just determining what we're going to pay that job. So whenever, we have 800 and something authorized positions. And so sometimes the department will call and say, we need a position that is able to, that's going to do laboratory testing in the water plant. We don't have one of those now. So we've got to figure out what we're going to pay that job. So we get with the department, figure out, what does it require? Does it require a license, a Class A water license? Does it require a biology degree? Are they going to supervise anybody? We get all that information, and that's how we determine what we're going to pay the position and what the job description looks like. And then we post that position to the outside. Now, you do have a good point, a fair question about we do sometimes when we post positions, we post internally only. And I definitely agree with you that sometimes, that can cause us to have a more limited pool. But by that same token, I know too that, sometimes we have very good qualified candidates that have worked hard and demonstrated that they have. Tamara's an example. I didn't want to go outside when we had a training position. She had proven her value to the city and is dynamic. So there was, in HR's mind, there was no reason to go to the outside when we had a great candidate. But I definitely understand, and we do. If we don't know that there's a Tamara that exists, or a Mark McNeil, our fire chief, then we do always go to the outside. But we definitely need to do better with increasing the number of applicants that are qualified that apply for those jobs.
Okay, thank you. My other quick question, you said that they have a fire and police have a test. And that test is generated by a proctor or a testing company, but it's facilitated by HR. So is that a test that is not culturally biased? I mean, is it a test that is passable depending upon the different experiences? Because answers are dependent upon the experiences of the person that's taking the test. For example, ACT versus SAT. Those tests are culturally biased, and that's why some cultures steer more towards certain college entrance tests. So that was my first question, and are they able to retest if they don't pass? Because you said take the test, you don't pass it, you're out. So do they get a lifeline?
No, so on the police and fire test, all of the tests are entry-level police or entry-level fire. And, we complete the statistics, as does everybody else, to make sure that there's no adverse impact for the use of that test. As part of the HR process. And the tests are designed and we only test if someone's not certified in the police department, because what you're trying to make sure that when we hire a new police officer and we send them to the police academy for 6 months, then they have to take the state licensing test. So that test we're given is hopefully making sure we're using our tax dollars wisely, and that candidate will be able to pass that state licensing test. Now, that was one of the changes we made in 2016 when we did the lateral entry. We were like, well, why are we testing police officers that are already police officers? Because they've already passed the test. That's a waste. So we don't do that anymore. So if you're already a certified police officer since 2016, or I can't remember the exact date, but in the last few years, now you go straight to the physical ability test and take that. We don't test it because that really is just to make sure that you're going to be able to pass that state licensing test. Now, for promotionals, those tests are made. So we'll say, you got to know our HR policies and procedures. And so you're going to need to study the city policies and procedures, and you're going to need to know the general orders that the police have. And that's what the test is over. And obviously that is important if you're going to be a supervisor. So we are very sensitive to that. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to know, and again, I enjoyed your presentation. Are your interviews in person, by video, or telephone?
It depends. So most of them are in person. We have actually the first, we've only had two, the onboarding and recruiting specialist. We actually hired her from up in New York. And so we hired her through doing like a Zoom meeting. Most of the times it is in person. Sometimes you'll have the initial, if you've got several candidates, we've done this in HR before. If you want to narrow down the pool some, you'll do a phone interview first with some just standard questions if you need to narrow the pool down before you bring in, rather than interviewing 10 people. And so it's case by case, but we do it both ways.
Have you considered when the visual of someone can also create your hidden biases? So have you considered maybe just doing telephonic? The interview may be more intense, but when you do telephonic, that visual bias is not able to occur. And sometimes we have a visual bias when we see someone, we just don't like the way they look. And they may be a great candidate. And so have you thought about maybe not always doing it?
I think that's a great tool, and I think maybe as a positive of COVID, if there is a positive, that will, I think we're going to realize that we can do a lot of things by telephone, things that we always have done in person. Now I know that I do telephonic interviews almost on every job that I hire, just at least for that first screen, just because it's quicker and more efficient. I don't want somebody to have to drive down from out of state or whatever until we know that and give them a chance to ask us about us. But that's a great suggestion that we can add to our training tools.
And I have one more question. What are special abilities? So in this program, you said special abilities, and I just don't know what that is.
Yes, ma'am. So for Project Search, I'm assuming this was, so special abilities, there's a different, I don't want to say disabilities, like learning disabilities that they may have.
Challenges,
Or
physical challenges or mental challenges.
Or mental challenges that they might have. So it's a little bit harder for them, as you may know, just to be in the work environment or to try to figure out, how do I find a job? Where do I look? So LASD has partnered, we're one of their host sites for them to come out and do that internship with us. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
It's more to teach them how to get along at a workplace. Sometimes they might be autistic. We've had with physical disabilities and wheelchairs, just to make sure that we teach them those skills so that they can go out and be successful in the world as on their own.
I commend you for that program. I thought that was what it was, but I wanted to make sure. It's a great program.
Oh, hi, Penny Ballard. Thank you. It was an awesome job you guys did. I do have a couple of questions, but first I want to start off with saying I graduated from the Louisville Citizen Program, and the employees that work for the city of Louisville love working for the city of Louisville. So you guys are doing a fantastic job. I worked for the city of San Antonio for almost 20 years, and we had a great culture, but you guys really have a fantastic culture. I also took the police program, citizen police program, and it was awesome. The only problem is in both of those programs, I can't remember any black leadership, anybody black talking to us through the I would think that was 8 months, can't remember how long. And then the police one, we did have some Hispanic sergeants or whatever talking, but other than that, even in the classes themselves, I was probably the only minority, the only black person in the classes. I haven't taken the firefighter program because at the time I think it wasn't available or it hadn't started back up. But for everybody in this room, it is a great experience. I guess my question is, for the city of Louisville, do we have a diversity officer?
We do not, but in the very first meeting, when we were taking notes and listening, that suggestion was thrown out. Unfortunately, we're working on our budget now, and because of our revenue shortages, we have cut 29 positions? 28 positions.
Yes, we have reduced 28 positions to balance the budget, and we had more bad budget news today with our property values coming in from Dallas down another 3%. So I have 2 council members that didn't know that until I just said that. So we have challenges, but we always have a list of ideas that we like to give to the council, to talk to the council about. And one certainly is a position that would focus on diversity and inclusion. I think it's not only in our hiring process, it's throughout the city. It's purchasing, it's hiring, it's how we do business, it's how we interact with the business community. We talked about that a lot at the last meeting. So I do think it's an important position. I put it on a list that I want council to think about as revenues start to come back and we start being able to add some things again. I think that should be a very high priority. That would be my recommendation to the council.
And what percentage of Louisville, I can't remember, it's been a while since I looked it up, Black African Americans that live here in Louisville?
I believe that's 8%, 11%, 11%.
So right now in the city of Louisville, we have 12.6% of our citizens are Black, and our employee total is 7.4%. And you're absolutely right about our leadership. Although I will say that one of our absolute shining stars is our IT director, who started with us as an intern, and then he was promoted through the department and he's another one that we did not go outside when we promoted him to our IT manager and then to our director. And you're right, Chris Lee should be talking to our groups because he is the one Black director that we have, and he is very, very impressive.
And having our city council, I think we all know in this room that Brandon is our only African American person that sits on the city council. 22 years prior to that, we had Bobby. So that's.
We had Leroy.
Who else? When was Leroy? Oh, yeah, yes. I forgot about Leroy. So, in hopes that our city council will give us a position for diversity and inclusion for our city, I think that will help the city come to some kind of point where we can have our current city employees, because listening to the discussion today from HR, it seems like the minority city employees, the Black city employees, can't get past supervisor. So you got supervisor, non-supervisor, they're there. Then they're never promoted. Were they part of manager? I can't remember. Is it they stop at supervisor?
At director. We have one director is all.
See, in my world, that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
And
I agree with you.
I applaud for our training person that we have here, but if you ask me, she sounds like she's totally overqualified for the position she has now. She probably should be running the training department. And I understand that you brought her up through the ranks, but I think having a diversity director can help you guys understand. I don't know who, was it Dr. Petaway that asked the question before, help you guys understand that you're recycling the same people, employees, so you're never going to get to the next level of having that diverse work group, because you're promoting from within, because you can also post your position within for 7 days and then post it on the outside and choose the best qualified candidate. And we all want to be promoted from within the corporation, but if it's not helping the city get to the level that they need to with minorities, then you're not doing anyone any justice. So that's something I think we probably should put up on the board. I mean, we have a diversity problem here in the city of Louisville, and it's an amazing city, and the employees are happily working here, but I think we do have opportunities when we open new things like the Thrive Community Center to bring in minorities to run development operations like that. It's just something I think the city is lacking tremendously.
I totally agree with you, and it's something we need to focus on. I will make one clarification. Tamara is our training program. She is the director, she is the specialist, she is it. We are a very lean city.
Well, there's a big difference between specialists we all know that in HR, when you're putting together a job, you could be a specialist, or you could be the director of a training program.
Right. We just have one director, and that's the HR director. We're a very lean city. That's another one of the issues that we have. There was some study done by Carrollton, City of Carrollton, and when they looked at the city of Louisville, I mean, when you look at our cost per service, we're one of the most effective in the Metroplex. That's because we have that lean staffing. But that lean staffing and that low turnover, and I'm not making excuses, and I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but it makes for slow change. So certainly there are a lot of things that we can do to make a difference. And I agree, going to the outside is certainly very, very important. Having everybody in the room, forming relationships. You guys, word of mouth is the best recruitment we have. And so for you guys, and for you to say it's a great place to work, we want to see change, and for you to tell people that, that's incredibly important.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying, but slow change does not make change. So we either want to do it or we don't. We either want to progress and move forward and retitle these positions and make sure that we have everybody, all of our ducks in the row, and not just one director. Because to me, a specialist is a specialist and a director is a director. That means that, is it Tamara? Yes. Then I don't know what the pay scale is on that, but I guarantee you it's different than the director's pay scale. And did I hear you say you had your master's in? So for us in the city of Louisville, listening to how dynamic she is, and she's young, we would love to keep her, but she could go to the city of Dallas or somewhere and be director of training, or another. Okay, she can go. You said no. You're shaking your head no.
We're not going to let her go anywhere.
But that's stunting her growth. You shouldn't want to stunt the growth of any of your employees just to keep that one black employee or your one IT, your star IT, whoever he is.
Our
Director, which should be your star because you don't have any other black directors.
Absolutely.
And I've never met him. I've never seen him at any of the leadership. I guess, I don't know, but that's just you ask us here for our thoughts.
Absolutely.
Bobby Mitchell said we need to make sure we ask for what we want.
Absolutely. One thing I will say, too, that hopefully, like I mentioned, we're starting to see retirements. And so as we have retirements, that's opened up positions. And Chief Deaver was just able to make some promotions into leadership this week. And we were able to add a woman and 2 minorities to the next level. So that's what it's going to take as people retire. And then...
But I think the police department is different.
Oh, absolutely.
I also work for the police department when I worked for the city of San Antonio. And I realized that they have to pass exams to be sergeants and they have to move it and flow differently. And with the police department, you know, I work kind of, see our police department kind of recruit from within our community. Yes, it's community. Because my son went to junior, Explorer program. And went on to San Francisco State because of the Explorer program. Graduated with a criminal justice degree. And a year in, when he graduated, he decided that that's not something he wanted to do. So he went back to school and got a business degree, and now he works in business. But you have to give kids that kind of opportunity to see that there can be more right here in their community.
Absolutely. That's one thing I'm excited about our Youth Action Council. We have had a very diverse Youth Action Council with our youth in Louisville, and I'm hoping that they want to work for a city someday, and they want to be a city manager, or they want to be an HR director.
And that would have been actually an amazing thing to see when we were going through the city of Citizens University. We were never exposed to it.
And it's kind of a new program, so that's a great point that you just made. We need to talk to Julie about making sure we get some exposure with that. That was actually one of Brandon's brainchild, so we owe him for that.
Yes, it's kind of hard to get in there from up here. I've got several questions, and perhaps I missed this. Is the city currently working with a firm that specializes in recruiting minorities?
No, we're not currently doing that.
Is that something you'd consider? And I tell you why I asked that question. A firm that specializes in recruiting minorities will have additional insight in terms of finding the most qualified candidates, as well as providing feedback to the people within their sphere about your factor analysis. In other words, I would imagine you've noticed that of the minority candidates or Black candidates that you don't hire, what is it that they're lacking? And once we can pinpoint that, we can address it and get to the root cause of bringing more qualified candidates who are more likely to be hired by the city of Louisville.
And we have added that to our board. That's a great suggestion.
Okay. And like I said, it's kind of hard to get in from down there, so I got another question. In terms of, advertising, has the city ever considered doing a sustained recruitment campaign? And I'm not just talking about something involving money. You can do a sustained campaign just with sweat equity, being present, being out in the community. Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, and we started a little bit with that, with the new recruiting onboarding specialist, to where before COVID, we started going out to getting to more job fairs that we hadn't done before. We didn't have the staff to have someone out of the office for those. But then in the community too, we had so many events before COVID around Louisville, and so we would go just simply set up a table, or if at elementary school, and to where there was with the Chin population and meeting with elementary school, was there a place for us to come in to talk to not just the students, but the parents are at that school as well for those. And so we do try to get out as much as possible. And that's a newer area, just because now we have that staffing to start getting out there more.
And this is my final one for right now. Have you seen any research which informs you on how the city of Louisville is perceived in the community and the surrounding areas?
Do you know? No, so not the citizen survey. Is that what you're talking about, or more? We do. James does a citizen survey every year or every other year.
Yeah, if we could find that out, that would help us with our recruitment and with our creative marketing efforts. Is what I'm getting at. Once we know exactly what we're faced with, getting that information will help us and guide us in developing the right strategy to get people to be a part of our city.
We're going to catch Tamala real quick, and then Essence.
If Essence has her
I'll go to Essence first. Okay, Essence, you are up.
Okay, awesome. So I wanted to take it back to when we were talking about the fire and police department recruitment and how it's not as diversified because often you hire people who are already certified and experienced. And when you do things like that, many people have already mentioned, that you're putting people who are historically and perpetually disadvantaged in a further disadvantaged place. So you're a part of the system that places a glass ceiling, what we call a glass ceiling, on minority communities. But I'm more of the stance, and I'll probably expand on this later in other meetings, that we should be working to defund the departments significantly and start exploring and taking steps towards an America in which the police are not the primary responders to everything from a robber to a school disturbance by a student to a home mental health check and like to a homeless person. I think we should start exploring like what it could look like if we had alternative responders and things like that. But again, that's something I think I'll expand on more when we talk about the police department specifically. But even in the, in an ideal future where we start creating new jobs, new kind of responders, I think that same principle applies to, you can't keep only hiring people who have this certain level of experience, because many people have opportunity that others don't. And so like they said, if you're just continuously hiring the same people, you're recycling people, and new people never get opportunity. Disenfranchised communities stay disenfranchised. So something to keep in mind. And also, again, something I'll expand upon more, but in the process of diminishing the need for the police department, investing in alternative response isn't the only way. Also, I'm a strong believer in crime being born out of need. So we can decrease the occurrence of crime when we further invest in social programs that directly grow the people in our community. So, for example, when you're talking about the youth programs, I think a lot of those are a good start, but unfortunately, I think you mentioned something about them offering unpaid internships. And so, things like that make those programs unfair. So making those internships paid to be more fair to all youth, but especially those who can't afford to spend any more of their time spent outside of school doing unpaid work. So that opportunity shouldn't just be for the more privileged children. Those should go into further disadvantaging the disadvantaged. And to make it a race thing, because unfortunately so often it is a race thing. Like I said, a strong believer in the fact that much crime is born out of need, and the results of environment. So when you come from a family and a community of people who are robbed of opportunity, and sorry, I'm reading from my notes because like he said, it's kind of hard to get in when you're online, but when you come from a community and family of people who are robbed of opportunity because they can't take advantage of them, because they have, limited available of resources and things that provide them with the security to be able to take advantage of things like unpaid internships. They might find themselves surrounded by generations of people who have never been able to have their basic human needs met reasonably, and which leaves them stuck in a cycle. So again, strong believer in crime being born out of need, these kind of cycles that you lead people into by, not making social programs really accessible to them and not hiring them, leaves minority communities and their members continuously in this cycle of need. And a lot of them kind of turn to a life of crime to feed these needs. And this continues and adds to the stigma that minority groups are like criminals and thugs and, then not fit for work and things, because then you do background checks and things before they can get into government and safety programs. And then we never have a say. And it's all resulting from this cycle. So that's kind of all I have on that. On the fire department and background check, I don't know how much Louisville has control over that, but I know that it'd be nice to get the city on the side of loosening up some of the background checks for fire department officials and things like that, just because I'm not exactly sure your exact requirements because it was a bit vague of what you guys said. But I would love to know more about those things. But I know that in this country, we have kind of an issue of using prisoners and people who have committed crime to do jobs such as firefighting. But then once they're let out, they're still disenfranchised and not able to get jobs in those fields, even though they got plenty of experience doing it, being paid next to slave wages when they were in prison. But now they're not good enough for it outside, and they don't have opportunity to make a living and turn their life completely away from crime. They get thrown back into a loop. So of course, you don't want just anyone in people's homes and, working in response teams. But I think some of the requirements can be loosened up in many parts of the country. And I'm not saying necessarily Louisville uses their prisoners as firefighters, but I know specifically in California earlier this year and last year, a lot of prisoners were fighting the wildfires and things like that. So say someone comes from California and they choose, to live in Louisville or something, will that type of person, once they're free, have an opportunity to fight in our fire department? And what is Louisville doing to create those opportunities and stop this cycle happening to people? So I think the only questions I have regarding that is like, how much control does Louisville have over those hiring requirements, and what are Louisville's current background check requirements?
So we can provide you that information, what we provide the candidates that outlines that. So we'll get that to James and he can send that out to everyone on the committee. Are you just looking at fire, or do you want to see fire and police background standards?
While we're at it, I'll take the police as well.
Okay, we'll send both of those, and I will add to the list. I think I mentioned that we are looking to do a general hire for firefighter in our next round, where we are not limiting it to those who are already firefighters. So that will give us, hopefully, open up the opportunity for a more diverse applicant group.
Thank you.
Well, one quick note also, you mentioned internships, unpaid internships. A lot of cities use those because it's cheap labor. Louisville doesn't. Any intern that we have is a paid intern, so like that's the right way to treat people, not do it unpaid.
I think she's referring to our project search. And just so you know, one clarification on project search, they're in class part of the day with LISD instructors on our property, and it's a joint partnership. They're learning in class how to interview, how to do your resume, and then the other part of the day they have job coaches that are working maybe in the animal shelter or in the library learning a skill. And we have hired some of those interns for jobs when they come open, but many times before they finish the program, they get a job working somewhere else in our community, because this is a school program. It's part of their LISD program.
Also, just to piggyback too, they are seniors when they come into that program.
Okay, thank you for that clarity.
Anything else, Essence, before we move on?
I'm okay, thank you.
If you know something, just chat or raise hand and we'll catch you.
Okay, so I just want to ask about you were Chief Deaver, you was talking about what are some of the questions that are asked on the application for the police officers. So you said it was questions about selling drugs, using drugs, criminal activities, and bad debt. I'm not against those type of questions being asked. What I want to know is, are those questions broken down as to which type of drugs? Marijuana, cocaine,
Yes.
crack, opioids. For using drugs, the same thing. Criminal activities, does it give a breakdown? Bad debt, does it take into consideration child support, hospital bills, tax liens, credit cards? And so my reasoning for asking are those questions knockout questions, meaning that if you answer, okay, so by them not being knockout questions, they're able to give an explanation or a clarification. So when that's being done, who is the person that is interpreting their answers? You know, is there going to be leniency towards one person or not towards the other? Because as I was looking on the chart, it shows on page 9, chart 17, I'm looking at the applications received for all races. And the one thing that I did know that the percentage numbers fluctuate with the minorities, whereas the numbers for the Caucasians, they actually rose on all 4 circles. And so that led me to ask the question about the interpretation of how their answers to their yeses are. Because I know being an insurance agent, when we're going over the applications, for our clients that answer yes, they get the opportunity to say, why are you taking this? Why are you taking 3 high blood pressure medications? So that.
Yeah, so there are some that are automatic rejections. There are some that are automatic rejections, and we do that so that we can be consistent. So across the board, if you used cocaine 5 years ago, it's an automatic rejection, permanent rejection. And that is across the board, no matter what. No excuses. As an adult, if you use cocaine within the last 10 years, it's automatic rejection. Where there is some leeway is in the credit part of it. All of those come up from the background investigators. They go through our hiring manager. They go to the assistant chief over that hiring manager, and then ultimately they come to me. I had one today, as a matter of fact, that we did end up temporarily rejected, and I have no idea what the race was. I don't ever see any of that. But this person had some $20,000, I believe, in collections, had just filed bankruptcy, and already had stuff that he was behind in payments on. So that was a temporary rejection until he cleared that up.
And my next question is for you, Melinda. I know there's been a lot being said about the culture of Louisville leading up into this point, how it's been great. But if you look at it, it hasn't been great for everyone. And so my question is, again, I go back, change or chance. So we know cultures flourish because everyone has the same ideas, the same beliefs, the same whatever you want to call it. So with that being said, leading up till now, we see, or you guys have seen, you've been here for 30 years, that the culture of the city of Louisville has been predominantly Caucasian. So with that being said, like I said in the beginning, we can only have change when there is a change in a belief system in the heart. Because we can put all these parameters in place, but if that's not taken into consideration, that change is there, all this will be done for naught. So my question is have there been a change, or is it going to be a change in the culture that allowed this to flourish to where it's been predominantly white? Because we can't say it's always been, it's not been qualified candidates, or everybody failed all the knockout questions for all the minorities. So somewhere there was a belief system that was put in place that everybody was okay with. So with that being said, there needs to be some personal insight to see, was I helping this to flourish? Was I making sure that this stayed predominantly Caucasian? Because we can't say no one applied, no one was qualified, and everyone failed all those knockout questions or everything like that.
Yeah, so my personal feeling about how we can do better, I know in the police, especially in the police department and in the fire department, because now we have a little diversity when we had none, that HR's role in their processes is very decentralized or centralized. We're out on every step of the process. So there's an HR person that's at the test, and when somebody gets rejected for the police department, we read that. The HR director reads that. And if we see something that doesn't look consistent, then we can reach out. we're very involved in that process, and you see that the police does a better job. But after we went with an electronic applicant tracking system, which has been great for staff because it reduces the workload of the HR staff, but what I can't tell you, because we send the applications to the department, HR doesn't hear about it again until somebody says, I'm hiring John Doe. So we don't know what has happened from the time we sent those applications out till we've got them back. So one of the things that that we've talked about, and this has given us a lot of great input and has renewed that focus, is we're going to have to get the HR staff out in those departments. Tamara trains, but she can sit here all day and tell them, you can't ask these questions, but that doesn't mean that she's reaching those people. So some of the things we've talked about is putting Tamara, the recruiting specialist, Matt, the HR staff, requiring them to be a part of the interview board in those individual departments. I think that everybody knows, I hear all the time, HR's we're the police, we're the tail that wags the dog of the city. We have all the rules, but there's a need for that. And so I think that could be one positive step we could do by getting HR more involved at that level on the hiring process and see if that makes a difference. I think recruiting a diverse pool of applicants to where we get good qualified minority candidates is very important. So we as a team are going to be working on that. Did you have something to add to that? So, that's what we see that we're going to gain from this process. I do my work every day, and sometimes you get in a routine, and it takes this kind of process to make you realize I need to step back. What worked 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when we had that community relations and we decided to advertise differently and do things differently, well, it's time to refresh that, because moving to an electronic system has completely changed HR's role in the hiring process, and I'm not sure that's a positive thing for diversity.
Okay, now one last question. Well, not a question. I know that there was at the end, a suggestion for someone to come in and speak about diversity. There is a person, I think she's still alive, her name is Jane Elliott. She will be perfect. And
who is she with, Tamala?
I can forward you more information. And the reason why I say her, she's a white lady. But she will be great, because what I don't want to see is a black person come in. Because they just preach to the choir. You know what I'm saying? We don't need to preach to us. We live it. We understand it. So we need for someone to come in that other people can relate to as well. You know what I'm saying? Talk about diversity. Because everywhere I go, every diversity person at any corporation is always black. Okay? We get it. We understand it. We live it. This doesn't wash off. So we get it. So that's why I'm saying, please don't send in someone black to talk about diversity. That's my opinion. She is really good. Jane Ellis good? Yes. Yes. Jane Ellis will be very good. She will be I don't know if she's local, but she will be the perfect person to come in to talk about diversity.
And I think Tamara had some really good ideas, that just talking about repeating this process similar to this with our employees. Because you know what? I don't know that we've ever asked our employees of color what it's like to work for the city of Louisville. And I think having that conversation where the rest of us can hear their stories and their experiences, and a lot of time it's the conversation. I've learned so much from this process, and this process has generated a lot of conversation between Chris Lee, our IT director, and he's my direct report, and he's very interested in this and has asked a lot of questions about it, and it has created a lot of very good conversation between the two of us, and he's had some opinions of how we should do this process too. So I think that this is great, and I think getting our employee workforce to have some of these conversations, and you know what? Quite frankly, they may have some great ideas on recruitment. They work here. They know how we got them, what made them want to apply at the city of Louisville, and do they feel like they've not been promoted because of their color? I want to know that. So I think, and Tamara, she's a great facilitator, and I think she has a great plan for us.
All right. So I want to say, I'm sorry. We only have 9 minutes. I want to make it brief. So with this said, first, thank you guys and ladies for this presentation. This is not a question, more of a maybe recommendation. We, for people that work with youth, kids, in the schools and everything, kids are influenced by what they see in front of them. And, they're inspired by what they see. So nowadays you ask kids, what do they want to do? What do you want to do when you grow up? We had actual careers. Now they want to be YouTubers. They want to be rappers because that's what they're exposed to.
Right.
So I just want to say the level of exposure that the police and the firefighters have needs to start younger. It's not when they are hitting college or they're about to graduate, because by that time they have in their mind what they might want to be. And each of us in this room were inspired by somebody to be where we are today. So if they don't see that level of exposure at a young age, or what they're doing and who they're exposed to, that changes the dynamic of what you might get. I've taken a firefighter's test before and I didn't study. I thought it would be easy. It's not easy. It's very difficult. I knew I could have done the physical part, but I wish I would have studied more. That is not an easy test. Had I known what I was to be prepared for, I would have started way earlier studying for that. So all I wanted to put on your docket, 2 things: exposure, and you said earlier, word of mouth. How many times are they talking to the kids, not just giving out a sticker that says deputy, my son loves them, I'm not knocking it, but it's the conversations that come along with it that spark the interest for them to continue and seek that. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay, so of course I've got a few questions. So the non-Texas certified officer, explain that to me, please. What does that mean?
So for police officers to work in Texas, they have to have a certification through the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. So that makes them become lawful to work for Texas. So the state of New Mexico might have their own licensing. So if I'm a police officer in New Mexico, then I come and want to work in Texas, I either challenge the test and take the Texas licensing test so that I can be a police officer in Texas, or I can go back through the police academy to learn the Texas laws and become a police officer that way. Now, when we talk about recruiting, we've said several times we recruit certified and non-certified, which is what we would like to do for fire too, because then all you have to be a police officer for the basic is to have a high school diploma and be 21 years of age, or you can have a GED and 2 years of college. And that's the Texas licensing requirements.
Okay, so does any of this have to do with the associations or unions? The police association or union as far as that certification?
So one thing that you'll hear more about and learn more about at the city of Louisville, we are the largest city in Texas. We're not civil service. We don't have collective bargaining. We don't have meet and confer. Our officers don't belong to, some of them have a TPA membership that provides them access to an attorney if they would need it, but we don't have a union per se in the police department. And that's something we're very proud of, because our employees don't feel like, our police officers don't feel like they need a union rep because they're not treated fairly. And that's something that Chief Deaver will talk a lot about next week, about the advantages of that. And the other thing that's really advantageous about that, if you keep hearing these terrible stories about these officers that have committed these heinous crimes, that have this history of discipline, and the city just, police chief or the city is hamstringed when the commission, the Civil Service Commission, or the Oversight Committee puts them back to work. I encourage you to take some time to go out to our transparency webpage. We went out and put every police officer that we've terminated in the last 5 years, and you can see what they were terminated for. And as Matt talked about, their only recourse is to appeal that to the city manager, and she's never overturned a termination. We get rid of them. We don't want them. That's not the Louisville way. If that police officer doesn't treat our citizens right, and that's the one thing that Bobby said last week that's most important to me as being over the police department, the ACM. If somebody mistreats anybody, we want to know about it. We've got body-worn camera footage that we can look at. We've got and we want to deal with that officer. That's not the Louisville way. That's not the way we want to treat any citizen. So if that's the one takeaway, that's what I love about Bobby. She'll call me and say, I heard this happen. Check it out. And if it happened, we're going to deal with it. I can assure you.
Okay. Is residency a requirement for any of the jobs in the city?
Residency requirement? No. We have employees that live all over the Metroplex.
Okay. And then my last one was that if we could suggest maybe the hidden biases thing that you could do for your hiring managers, because that may be a big issue as far as what people see. If they see your management team as one way, and then they're hiring someone, they may not feel comfortable bringing someone different.
So the United Way of Denton County has a process. I don't know if any of y'all are participating in it right now. It's a series of diversity and inclusion testing and training, and I'm going through that now, and there is part of that is that bias test that you can, on everything and I've shared that with Tamara, and I think that there's pieces of that we need to put in to our employee program. And so I'm on the United Way board, so right now this is kind of a trial thing, but I'm hoping that we can take that process and put it in place too. So we're looking for all the tools that we can find. So anything that y'all have that you know of, we would love to know about it.
So I just want to thank everyone for participating in this event. Our people on the web, I know Calvin, I know a lot of the people in here, and I'm not a native Texan. My grandfather is, so that's my Texas connection. But I was born in the city by a lake too, and I can say without a doubt, you don't get the response from people in the city of Chicago, where I'm from, that you do here. Now, Louisville is a great city, but we have a lot that we have to do. And I've talked to Donna about this. We want to make sure that our leadership in the city represents the diversity of our city. That's something that we need to improve on. We need to work on the procurement process, make sure that we have representative businesses of Black owners, Hispanic ownership, Chin ownership as we can. Those are things that we need to work on. But the fact that we're having these conversations is actually a positive and will move us forward. And I want everybody who's participating in this to remember this. Once this program is over, because I think it's like 8 weeks, don't feel that you can't contact somebody from the city. You can email me all the time, that's fine. But if you want the right answer, because all I'm going to do is email Donna and Melinda to get the answer. But don't feel like if you have a question or you have a concern about something, continue those relationships, because that's how you get things done. Unfortunately, sometimes we become reactive to oh, this is horrible, but you build those relationships beforehand with people so you can say, hey, let's tweak this before something becomes like a big problem. The transparency webpage that they talked about, I talked to Chief Deaver and Donna about that, I believe about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And within a week or two, they got that out, because one of the things I know from personal experience of dealing with police in my hometown is that they regularly violate your rights. And when you chose to complain, they will suggest maybe you shouldn't make a complaint, or they'll lose your complaint, or you never know what happens to the complaint, and that builds mistrust. That's one thing that builds mistrust. So by making that the complaint system visible for everybody, showing you what happens with those complaints, that's one way of kind of showing people that we're working toward being a little bit better. And that's what this process is making us a little bit better. I'm glad the mayor brought this program forward. I'm glad you're all here. We look forward to your perspectives, and we thank you for being here. And if you have any questions with me, feel free to email me. Tamla, we're Facebook friends, as are most of us. But I just wanted to make sure we say that because I want to thank the staff, because you think about any other city, surrounding cities or wherever, they're not doing this. We are. We're not perfect, but let's get there together.
I don't have a question. I just really had a comment, and it follows up on a few things that we've talked about, not just at this meeting, but at other meetings. And I'm really following up on my sister from the MLK committee, her comment about interviews being in person, or maybe considering, and I have a personal, well, my son's personal experience at University of Arkansas when he was in the recruitment office of the school, and he was interviewing for summer internships. He wears an afro. He had 6 interviews, which was great, good experience for him, and didn't get those jobs, but his first interview on the phone, where nobody could see his face, he got that job, and he's working for that company right now, and he's getting really good reviews. So I think that there really is something to being able to have interviews where you don't necessarily see the candidate. Just a comment. And it's 8:30.
Okay, I have a question, and I don't think it happens much here as far as with the police and the citizens. Many times you see where there was something that was said, or someone said, I don't think that you respected me. Then you ended up with a police officer arresting someone or throwing them on the ground. So my question is there a training on de-escalation? Because sometimes just a minor problem, I mean, not even a problem, become such a major situation where just a little bit of de-escalation could have prevented a huge problem. You know, you have 4 or 5 police cars come up when it just didn't have to be that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Can you wait 1 week for the answer?
Sure.
Because we cover that next week in great detail.
I got a couple other questions. I probably should know this. You talked about the qualification, Class A, and I think you said Class C, misdemeanor for the officers not being hired. And then is there a age limitation on hiring officers? I'm not interested in my age, but I'm just curious.
No. So that's one thing with civil service is they have a top out. You can't be a police officer, or you can't be hired as a police officer if you're 45 years of age or older. We don't have that. We just hired a guy from Dallas, been with Dallas 30 years, and he works for us now. Been a great employee. So what was your question on the misdemeanor?
Class A.
Yeah.
Class A and a Class
Okay, gotcha.
Class A, Class C.
Gotcha.
I have no idea what those are.
So a speeding ticket, running a red light, anything like that is a Class C offense.
Okay.
And then it goes up from there. So a Class B offense would be something that is a little bit more serious than that. And I'll use theft for an example. So theft, if it's less than whatever dollar amount, then that would be a Class C offense. A little bit more would be a Class B. A little bit more would be a Class A. And then the next level up is a state jail felony, 3rd-degree felony, 2nd-degree felony, 1st-degree felony.
And one last real small comment. I just want to echo what the councilman said here. We're just glad you guys come here and listen to us. And I think that you're sincere. And I think everyone here is sincere. So we thank you guys, for doing it.
Well, thank you for asking us the questions and for
All right here. So I just want to thank Chief Deverick. We had our summer league this weekend, and his officers came and tossed the ball. I want to tell him that a lot of the young men were surprised. Some of them, I'm gonna be honest with you, was like, did anybody do something? No, they were asking questions. It was like they were looking around, everybody was looking around asking questions, but the police officer talked to them. They were comfortable. They got comfortable with them. They spoke to them. They talked to them. And so all the officers were, like, they just were shocked at first. And then when the officers started talking to them, they got very comfortable. And then, because when they first came in, the first thing they came to me, Coach Matt, what happened? Didn't anything happen? Nothing happened. They just come in to, toss the ball, and we're going to build relationships with them. And I'm piggyback off him. He just left, but we talked about this last week. It starts young. The police officers, it has to start young in the school systems. If it doesn't start young, they're going to want to be a YouTuber, they're going to want to be a rapper, they're going to want to do all those things. Because when I was a kid, I wanted to be a police officer. I wanted to be one. But as I got older, to be a teenager, I said, oh no, I'm getting harassed too much. But I'm thankful that you guys came and the officers came. I loved all of them. The boys loved them. They asked were they going to come back. So we would love to have you back.
You bet. And you got me down for Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Championship game.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going to practice.
Go ahead, in the back.
All right, so apropos, I feel like the preacher that's standing between you and dismissal. So I'm closing now. I really do want to say thank you again to the team that has presented tonight and the ongoing dialogue that we're having here. I think it's great. Do want to share a suggestion, I would guess, along the lines of the recruitment. Goes without saying that if you're going to go fishing, you want to fish in the pond that has fish in it. And so from that perspective, if you're trying to address the deficiency in the African American and just minorities in general population, I would, well, one, these days, obviously, it's got to be more of an online approach, not so much the printed material. But secondly, where online? So not just your traditional sites or what have you, but there's a concept that Google AdWords does, and that is using buzzwords that the audience that you're looking for would be using as searches and things like that, and then perhaps participating in advertising on those sites or where those searches are leading to be able to get to the fish that you want.
And I just might add that we will depend on any of y'all. If you have an in to a group that we can come out and talk to about what jobs we have open, what career interests. I mean, I think sometimes people don't realize that at the city we have accountants, we have attorneys, we've got all kinds of technical and IT, and we've got admin support. I mean, we have people that like to work in the parks, people that like to, so there's so many career choices, and if you give us an audience, we will come.
And I just want to add one recruiting question. And I'll share, right at this, as COVID-19 started in this area, was the first day of employment for our first ever Chin employee. And we worked really hard to recruit in that community because they had no representation, and they're 4% of the population. And we had a lot of success getting our job postings to their pastors, and they spread them through their churches. I know there's several pastors in the room If we were to get job listings to you, is that something you could take advantage of? Okay, just shoot me an email and we'll make that happen.
Yes, and if you have any career fairs or there's any groups that we could come and speak to, we would love to be invited.
I don't think anybody else has the microphone, Matt. I don't want to cut anybody off, but as you've heard from a few people, we are, a little bit past 8:30. But is there anyone else who wanted to contribute? Anyone online? We have no hands raised.
Will you have a career fair for the Drive Center whenever that happens?
So that was supposed to open, so most of those positions have already been recruited for and hired. I think we have a couple of positions that are open on our website now for the Thrive Now. I'd have to, do y'all know?
Yes, we have part-time.
So we have part-time positions available.
Yeah, most of the Thrive positions are part-time.
What we always have open and need are police dispatchers, police detention officers. If you know anybody that knows anything about, they're called traffic, what are those called? Signal traffic. That job's been posted for years. Yeah, for Thrive, we have an adventure guide, a part-time adventure guide, a part-time fitness attendant, a part-time gate attendant, a lifeguard. We have a purchasing manager. That's a manager position that's open right now, and I believe that we gave you a flyer that's in your packet. We have that available electronically. If you know anyone who is a purchasing person, this is a great opportunity for us to recruit a leadership position for our purchasing manager. So that job closes. It looks like it closes on
8/7.
August the 7th. So to apply, you just go out to the City of Louisville website, click on the job opportunities, and one of the advantages of the online system, once you complete a profile, then it makes it easy to apply for all of our jobs. So that job is would be a great opportunity for us to find a minority candidate. So, but we need help in recruiting. So we ask all of y'all to help us with that.
Okay, so I'm going to close this out. Great input. We got some ideas we're writing down. You'll see these things coming back week 6 when we start having some packages for possible recommendations. Next week is the Chief Deaver show. He'll have some help because he's got a lot of information on police. We'll see if we're able to send out the presentation to you a couple days in advance so you can look through it, because it's a whole lot. It's like a fire hose hitting you in the face. So we're going to try and give you an advanced look at that and be able to have some ideas and questions. And I want to add one more thing. We all appreciate the very kind words. We do. Hold us accountable, because we're not here just to talk. We're here to try and get some things done, and you don't want to waste your time just sitting around talking. So hold us accountable. We're here because we want to make those changes. Anything from you, Donna, as we close?
Because we want to hear from you, and we do want change, and we know we need change. And so I think we're all in this together, and we need each other in this. So I so appreciate all of you being here and asking questions and pushing, and that is appreciated. So if you have thoughts after you leave and you didn't get to share tonight, please feel free to email me, James, Melinda, any of us. If you have more questions, please feel free to call us. We can only grow together, and we can only get better together. So thank you all for being here very much.